Professor Paunio's contention is that there does exist, as it were, a parallel pagan type religion, which can be traced back far beyond the foundings of organizations such as the Club of Rome, which in 1968 really hit the news in the publication of a book, which was intended as a kind of neo-Malthusian manifesto. So what Professor Paunio's work does in this regard is it shows how these globalists, as it were, or people such as the World Economic Forum pushing things like the Great Reset, instrumentalize an agenda of fear and doom, a catastrophic narrative, in order to recommend themselves as a necessary solution.
What if I told you that you could trace the same sort of satanic, occultic religion that really vivified the Nazis to today's World Economic Forum? That might sound just too weird to be true, but what if there was evidence tying the two together? Well, that's what we're going to look at in today's episode of the John Henry Weston Show. We have with us a guest, Mikko Paunio is his name. Professor Mikko Paunio. And he joins us today along with Frank Wright, whom you all know from his writing at LifeSiteNews. Now, get this. Professor Paunio is an epidemiologist who has worked for a number of public health institutions in his native Finland, as well as a brief spell at the World Bank, and he's currently senior medical officer in the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health of Finland. His work as a scientific and policy advisor has seen him involved in state-level meetings across Europe and the United States. And it's he who has done the research in this, he who has been involved with these kind of people in very elevated positions. And I think the conclusions that he draws, the evidence that he brings forward, are going to startle you. This is the John Henry Weston Show. Stay tuned. Hello, LifeSite friends. Aren't you sick of the cancel culture? Aren't you sick of the overlords at YouTube deciding what you'll be able to see and what you won't? Are you sick of them dictating morality and your use of pronouns? Well, we have had enough. With rampant attacks and continuous censorship we face here at LifeSiteNews, we've decided to bite the bullet. We are taking video into our own hands and we're playing on our own terms rather than the whims of big tech. We have launched our own video platform. Now we have the ability to showcase our important news and views without the risk of being banned and silenced. Defenders of faith, life, family, and freedom can now speak freely at LifeSiteNews without censorship from anti-life, anti-family, anti-faith, anti-freedom folks who seem to run all the big tech companies. This, of course, takes tons of hard work and also your support. So we're in the midst of our quarterly spring fundraising campaign, and we are in need of your support, both prayerful and financial. These fundraising campaigns are vital to our survival and the ability to broadcast the truth for free all around the world. So with the launch of our new video platform, we will be incurring many new ongoing expenses due to the size and bandwidth of our servers, the personnel expenses to maintain such a large system, and for new and improved features that we hope to add in the coming months. We must raise our campaign goal of an absolute minimum of $500,000 to continue the fight to withdraw completely from big tech and strengthen our ability to survive in the giant online world. So please donate at the link in the description below. Thank you for your prayers, your support, and your dedication. We are honored to be in this fight with you. May God bless you. Mikko Paunio and Frank Wright, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Let's begin as we always do with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. So, Frank, if you could start off by introducing us to our very interesting guest.
Well, Professor Paunio got in touch with me following some remarks I made in a previous video, which we were about the Magic Mountain. And the Magic Mountain referred to the self-confessed idea of Davos by Klaus Schwab. He said that he'd chosen the mountain site of Davos because it was the site of Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain, which was a novel that took place in a sanitarium with a collection of rather rum characters, oddly enough, who gathered together and were inspired by certain occult theories. Following this, of course, Professor Paunio got in touch with me to say that there was far more to this than a mere passing resemblance. It's neo-paganism that draws on a 19th century tradition going back to Madame Blavatsky, through obviously developments such as anthroposophy, which has influenced people like Rudolf Steiner. And he claims to have met people and experienced this at the highest level of government in Finland and in European and international organizations. So I was compelled to get in touch with him, and I found what he had to say was quite remarkable and very well researched.
Mikko, if you could tell us, please, about your background that leads you not only to believe what you're doing through your research, but also having experienced it yourself in government itself.
The saga or the Odyssey began when I'm a measles expert, and one of the basic beliefs of Rudolf Steiner was that you have to contract measles as a child. And this leads to, for example, in Germany, they have Waldorf or Steiner schools. They have continuously outbreaks there. But this was so I got interested in this cult because he really, in one of his inner space flights, he found out that it is of immense importance that that a child gets contracts measles in order to have his or her soul journey.
Okay, so just before we continue, when you say inner space flights, you're not talking about an airplane flight, you're talking about some kind of meditative sort of thing, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. So this was the beginning, and then later on, when I was hired as a young medical researcher to study energy issues and to make comparative risk assessment for government of life cycle analysis of different energy sources. I came across with a guy called Pentti Malaska, who became later on world president in future studies, and he was a very ardent anti-nuclear crusader, and later on I found out that he belonged to these occult circles and believed in these theosophical ideas.
So, Frank, you're telling us that Mikko's had dealings also with heads of state and stuff that are also into this kind of occult belief or practice.
Yes, and not only this, quite apart from, well, we hear quite a lot about the kind of sulfur-fumed wreathed people of these supranational organizations, but Professor Paunio's contention is that there does exist, as it were, a parallel pagan type religion, which can be traced back far beyond the foundings of organizations such as the Club of Rome, which in 1968 really hit the news in the publication of a book, which was intended as a kind of neo-Malthusian manifesto. So what Professor Paunio's work does in this regard is it shows how these globalists, as it were, or people such as the World Economic Forum pushing things like the Great Reset, instrumentalize an agenda of fear and doom, a catastrophic narrative, in order to recommend themselves as a necessary solution. Now, the Limits to Growth in 1968 was a perfect example of this, which was launched by the Club of Rome, which is it still exists. It's a collection of around 100 technocrats, government leaders, business people, and so on, who get together and try and present themselves as a solution to this neo-Malthusian collapse mythology that they've invented. Professor Paunio rightfully indicates it is a mythology. It was debunked at the time as such, but it still gets enormous press coverage. Why? Professor Paunio maintains that the very people who control the media are themselves fans of this old, new, earth-worshipping religion, which at basis is deeply misanthropic. Secondly, his ideas are remarkable in as such as that he demonstrates where their fantasy worldview comes from. So much of contemporary ideology in terms of foreign relations, domestic policy, energy policy, Great Reset and net zero simply seems to be completely divorced from any practical utility whatsoever. The neoconservatives never count the cost of their own disastrous adventurism, which has led to the loss of wars. The environmentalists never account for how we're going to make these great transitions without the sudden collapse of industrial society. Professor Paunio maintains that the reason for this is that they are esoteric, occultist fantasists. And his remarks about the Club of Rome and about a certain person recruited by Klaus Schwab reveal the occult tradition that inspires these people and which explains their complete departure from consensus reality. If Professor Paunio would like to tell us about that man which Klaus Schwab recruited, we'd be very interested to hear about it.
Yes, he recruited Maurice Strong as his financier, and Maurice Strong is the figure in Agenda 2030, or he died in 2015, but nevertheless I have a chapter in this Postil article that there were the big mistake of Wizard of Baca Grande, but he and his wife, they are occultists, esotericists. Wife Hanne believes she's a reborn Indian, and Maurice Strong, they have this nature temple in Baca Grande in Colorado, where he made a really big mistake by inviting one Canadian journalist for 1 week, and he told remarkable things that proves that he was definitely part of this esoteric cult. And later on, Schwab made a huge mistake in 2015 when he appeared in Swiss television, where he said some remarkable things that people's brains, he will hack people's brains with microchips, and people will be connected to internet, and the world elite will be able to influence thinking and beliefs and etc. Originally, the founder of Club of Rome, Aurelio Peccei, in his book, in one of his books, he really reveals the belief system of Madame Blavatsky, and where he expresses the very basic principles of esoteric thinking, and he also made the first plans to organize this global governance system, which now appears to be complete.
To the innocent bystander who looks in and learns about Madame Blavatsky at all, it looks just like Satanism to me. Can you give us some background there, Frank?
Yes, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky attracted quite a lot of attention in her lifetime, which was around the mid to latter 2/3 of the 19th century, collecting around her the kind of salon that you'd expect from some kind of fin de siècle intellectual. But she wasn't an intellectual. As Professor Paunio points out, she was a fraud. What she was doing was she was promoting a kind of occult route to what she claimed was a supernatural wisdom, which, when contacted through effectively Gnostic means, would allow people to access a superior form of intelligence, which would thereby, shall we say, privilege them to govern others. This is obviously the attraction that promoted the interest of people who are also interested in government in such a system, because it appeals to their narcissism and it gives them a justification for anything that they subsequently do. Secondly, it allows you to base your worldview on personal fantasies, which is where it interlocks with people like Yuval Noah Harari, who apparently is a historian, according to Professor Paunio, and I think he's right. Secondly, Blavatsky was the inspiration for much of the 19th century and early 20th century occultism, leading to things like the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley's Thelema. So an obviously hugely intellectual figure in the revival, if you like, of Western occultism, or as we prefer to call it, the work of Satan. So yeah, Blavatsky is, if you like, a founding figure in this. One of the currents to which he gave rise was, of course, the anthroposophy, as opposed to her theosophy. Madame Blavatsky propounded a system called theosophy, which was, as it were, a philosophical, practical system of occultism that allowed you to become like God. Steiner then proposed anthroposophy, which was his offshoot of Blavatsky's cult. He's founded a bunch of schools. The Steiner-Waldorf movement is present across the world, and his belief system is odd to say the least. He's written various pamphlets on child development and education, but also various things that are less well known, such as a pamphlet on the occult significance of blood, and has some odd beliefs about reincarnation, race, and so on. But Steiner's ideas have been largely absorbed by what you call the German Völkisch movement. In Germany, there's a movement to which Carl Jung is attributed some kind of membership, which goes back to the 19th century and combines elements of naturalism, nature worship, nature loving, and a belief in the occult, and a belief in some kind of cosmic connection to the interior world. It's a form of pagan mysticism that informs currents which Professor Paunio highlights in his second postil article, that moved through the Nazi Party to modern day environmental administration and this neo-pagan cult that he claims is at the center of these kind of international environmentalist-inspired bureaucracies.
So you can trace that same sort of occult religion through the Nazi Party to today's leaders on the world stage.
There is a direct connection from Third Reich to German Greens. In their first presidium, August Hausleiter came from this extreme right-wing faction of the original German Greens, and they have their origins inside the inner circle of Third Reich. Rudolf Hess was the central figure, and he was a follower of Rudolf Steiner, and his lieutenants were original organizers of German Greens, and especially is important that August Hausleiter, who became the first chairman of German Greens, among two others, he wrote the very core action principles of this new Green Party.
Yeah, you write in the second postil article that Germany's Greens were established by the far left and old Nazis in Offenbach in 1979. It makes sense in retrospect. These kind of things, when you point that, it's the kind of thing that when you indicate it, you suddenly see it.
I had to write that article when it appeared in 2021 in May, that the opinion polls suggested that there would be again, after first time since 1945, a Green chancellor who has a very harsh posture against Russia. So this was a very not a very convenient feeling, and I simply had to write everything I knew about this Mr. Linkola, who, by the way, a piece of his sacred forest has been given to Pope symbolically by the Finnish Lutheran State Lutheran Church. which I think is horrendous because this deep ecologist, which the elite in Finland admires, was an ardent Nazi with horrendous. He worshipped death. He was a death cultist, and has promoted worldwide, for sure, one mass school shootings in Finland.
May I read out your quote about Pentti Linkola, just to explain who he is? Yeah, from your article. Yeah, it says in 1994. You write that in 1994, the Wall Street Journal published Pentti Linkola's population policy and anti-technological views on its front page. In this, he said his number one enemy was the United States of America because it stands for everything he hates, namely economic growth and freedom. He said that everything that humankind created in the past century must be destroyed. He was for a radical reduction of the world population and was quoted concerning a possible future war. If there were a button I could press, I would sacrifice myself without hesitating if it meant millions of people would die. What a charming fellow. I think you rightfully describe him as a crackpot who is also well known amongst English-speaking crackpots.
And who is he on the world stage right now?
He is nobody. He was a cultural figure, well known outside Finland, especially amongst those who study deep ecology. And he was, if you guys remember, this Unabomber, the serial killer who killed in the name of environment. He sent a letter to Pentti Linkola, but Pentti Linkola, he hated America and English language so much that he never replied. But he thought that everything that is culturally that German culture is superior.
But Pentti Linkola was the author, if I'm not wrong, of the Green Party of Finland's program, and he was an internationally influential environmentalist because of this, wasn't he? I mean, he did have an international audience.
He wrote this program, but because it was so outrageous, it never got accepted by the
Right.
soft Greens. But nevertheless, he has been extremely influential, and when he died, all these soft Greens had their crocodile tears and said that he was a wonderful thinker. But he has some, which I write about in the Postil article, some horrendous quotations of how massacre Jewish the Holocaust was ecological, because people were taken to camps by train, and they were gassed swiftly, and even their hair was recycled. So it's these kind of people that we are really. They are. When Pentti Linkola died, he was a hero, and there was this the biography was released just before his death, and it was chosen Finlandia Award in non-fictious books was awarded to the journalist who wrote that book, and etc. But again, I mean, it's horrendous that Pope accepted piece of Linkola's forest in 2016, I guess, when a bishop of Helsinki went to Vatican and donated it to Pope.
Some of you may remember, or perhaps even newly appreciate, the late Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen. He is considered one of the greatest communicators in the modern era and stands as a great example for all of us. in what it means to work in Catholic broadcasting. For over 50 years, Sheen captivated audience on both radio and television, and millions tuned in each week to hear his messages of hope and encouragement. One of LifeSite's supporters is Radio Maria, and they are now proud to be showcasing some of Bishop Sheen's timeless recordings on their weekly radio show entitled Bishop Sheen Presents. Please consider tuning in to Radio Maria on Friday afternoons at 2 p.m. Central or Saturdays at 5 p.m. to enjoy the Venerable Archbishop's wit and wisdom. For more information on Radio Maria and their Catholic work, please visit their website, radiomaria.us. That's radiomaria.us. And now, back to the program. Clearly, the sort of Blavatsky-inspired occult practice was prevalent with the Nazis. The famous story of Hitler himself sort of salivating over the spear of Longinus that pierced our Lord's side gives very good indication of that. But seeing it brought forward in time to the person that Klaus Schwab associated himself with, the Maurice Strong, who, by the way, was in Canada for a long, long time and developed all sorts of things here, worked also with Mikhail Gorbachev. So there is involvement in this kind of occult thing. And if anybody doesn't know the really occult practices of Maurice Strong, there's tons on the internet you can find. Look up his Baca Grande ranch in Colorado and see all of the various religious temples he had there. It's kind of like what the Pope is doing now with the Abrahamic Faith House. But anyway, so that brings this occult practice from, back then used by the Nazis into our world today, associated with the World Economic Forum already. But Professor Paunio, you say more than that the current world leaders are also involved in this same kind of occult practice.
I don't have direct evidence, but it was very revealing that in last World Economic Forum meeting, John Kerry had a very, very strange burst, and where he said that we are chosen almost from outer space, and we are very unique people who have a mission to save the planet. And so what I can say using open source material in this long postil article is that I can show clearly that these globalists who are steering world affairs from Davos, the simple reason why they need this I call it nature pantheism, which has been fostered in the upper echelons of the United Nations for 5 decades now. This new structure simply needs a new religion, global religion, in order to be able to govern. And I have ample of evidence of how all these central figures who are behind this Agenda 2030 are occultists.
Yeah, and really that's what we'd like to dive into a little bit, because that's really key to understanding, because everybody feels they're pushing all this insanity with like a religious fervor. None of it makes sense, and yet the agendas are being pushed. And I mean, it doesn't make sense economically, it doesn't make sense politically, and then when it gets down to the issues we deal with most, the whole life, family stuff, none of this stuff makes sense. Even if you look at feminism, how can feminists not be totally offended that the transgender cult, or whatever you want to call it, is taking away from women all the awards in boxing and running and all these sports? There's no sense to it, and yet it's pushed with a religious fervor that can only be called that, religious.
I can see the appeal of a nature pantheism to John Kerry, a man who resembles a haunted tree himself. So perhaps that's the logical connection I could find in that. But one thing that I found remarkable about your observations, Professor Paunio, is the fact that you insisted that these people are, in effect, fantasists. I found it a tremendous relief when you told me that flatly that the technology that they speak of, that they hope to use to enslave the world in service of their own program, simply doesn't exist. And that when I read you on Yuval Harari, and found that he was a fantasist, again, that was a terrific relief. So the fact that these people are fantasists as well is telling. And it ties in with their own belief system. It ties in with the idea that they would be in an esoteric nature pantheist group. It makes sense of the senselessness of their behavior.
Oh, yes. And there are now first signs in Finland that they understand that the legislation, which I also show in my essay, that it has direct steering and guidance from Davos through United Nations. It's crackpot, because the directive of energy efficiency was just passed by the European Parliament, and it will mean that municipalities would have to double their investments, and there would be no money for healthcare anymore, and people would have to repair their houses with zillions. There was a headline two days ago in newspapers, and people are just shocked. And I reviewed this piece of legislation, Fit for 55. It's a huge package, and this is only one piece of legislation, which also, it was also so that even churches were demanded to be repaired to zero energy requirements. But it is so insane legislation, and it has several regulations and directives, and which will just ruin European Union. And I have started to wonder, is this their plan to just cause chaos? Or is it really that they believe in these insane things? I mean, it's remarkable, exactly like John Henry said, that it is the we can feel it here as well. I think it's in Canada. You can feel the push, the irrational push. And I'm so happy that I could solve the puzzle that I've been sort of putting together in over 30 years. The last October, my predictions of complete chaos in energy issues in Europe, it did not materialize, because we have had an exceptionally warm winter. So this has really saved. I predicted that tens of thousands of people would have died if there had been a normal Eastern European winter.
I wanted to ask you about what you mentioned about the Fit for 55 climate package, and this article that you wrote for Real Clear Energy last August, within which you say that the World Economic Forum had backed a Finnish innovation fund called Sitra in order to produce a fabricated report that seemed to vindicate what's called the Finnish circular economy package. I mean, what you're saying is that the World Economic Forum used a front group to falsify evidence that its own programs, its own Fit for 55 climate change programs on a national scale were viable, but which you said would, if implemented, would reduce to Soviet-style 5-year planning and the downfall of modern industrial society. This does appear to be a framework for intentional collapse. Would you concede that this is a framework for intentional collapse?
I don't know, but the way they fabricated the story of circular economy in Finland, And they even have this year, or it was last year, they had even a follow-up meeting in Africa. I think it was in Rwanda, this global circular economy conference. But nevertheless, I had reviewed our waste policy for 20 years. I had given 100 reviews of EU legislation, and I knew what was going on in reality, and it was just the circular economy. It collapsed. There were attempts to really recycle stuff, but it is so energy consuming, so money consuming, and it was so impossible, so that finally I pushed it hard in Finland, but we managed to build a similar waste incineration plant network that exists in Denmark and Sweden.
So once again, these people are inspired to produce plans based on total fantasy that will result in ruin. These people they're dangerous because they have the power to enact their will upon a population, or the global population, should they get the opportunity. But their plans will result in disaster. I mean, it's arguable whether they know this or not, is your point, is it not? But the fact is that it would be a disaster.
Well, let's actually unpack that a little bit more. Just get right into that, because, I mean, that's a big thing for all of America, Canada as well. This whole idea of recycling, everybody's doing it. But you're saying that this, to go forward with it, costs more and in money and time and everything else than an incineration plant.
For example, if you take plastic, you have over 1,000 types of plastic, and in order to be able to recycle plastic, you would have to have only one type of plastic. And then the problem is that the plastic is extremely dirty. And the first years until 2018, what happened was that people in good faith, they separated plastic, but it was sent to China. But China, because of horrendous environmental damage caused by this recycling of plastic, had to stop that. But then plastic was exported to Malaysia, to India, to Bangladesh, but most of it ended up in oceans. And I have several reports on that. And when my first report came out 10 months later in the UN convention, Basel Convention, this practice of exporting this recyclable plastic was banned. So in beginning of 2022, OECD countries can no longer export this waste, which has been collected in good faith by the public, which has been misled to believe that you are doing something good. But the reality, especially in the United States, is that all their recycling schemes have collapsed 2, 3, 4 years ago, because it's so expensive and you get nothing out of it. Nothing.
Yeah.
The only
and
thing
we're still all doing this. We're all, doing that. For the most part, it is because they give you usually, I mean, it sounds insane, but, often you're given a bin to use that, and that's free. You have to pay that other garbage be taken away, but your recyclables, as they call them, the plastic or glass and the paper, they go in separate bins and they can be taken for free. Your regular garbage that you have to pay for to take away. It's insane. And yet we're doing this all for nonsense. And we've been doing it for years, and it's all insane.
Metals are recyclable and it's economically viable, but if you have a extensive incineration plant system, you can separate metals from the waste stream. So you don't need this separate collection, which is now also institutionally organized in all European Union with this. It's a ritual, but there is this new package of insane legislation, especially by which he was a vice president of commission and who is now head of Sitra, Jyrki Katainen, a Finnish guy, but he proposed this tremendously stupid circular economy package. Extremely, it's not from this planet. But it became into reality because there was this very strong collaboration between Commission, Sitra, and the World Economic Forum. So I can show in this real clear energy article that it was the interaction of these players that ultimately made this circular economy package possible. But more importantly, it was the Fit for 55 legislation was promoted with this circular economy concept. So it was the core concept of promoting this extremely harmful Fit for 55 European Union climate package.
Now, one of the things I wanted to get back to was just the more evidence for the occult. I know you said you didn't have direct evidence for the world leaders that we currently have being involved per se, but the policies they adhere to, the things they do, their involvement even with the World Economic Forum itself and its tie-in are there. But there are very clear indicators that major influencers in the public are in fact involved in this kind of occultish behavior.
I published a book in 2015 and I dug quite deep into this religion. I had not solved all the puzzles, so not until last October, but nevertheless, there are a lot of Hollywood actors and these high societies. They are involved, have been traditionally involved with these practices. And I can say that as an agnostic person and a scientist, that I can easily use the word satanic, because what they have done, for example, in Sri Lanka, these WEF people, it is just horrendous. And I am really afraid, and I think Jordan Peterson is also afraid that they have something very sinister.
If you could explain to us what did they do in Sri Lanka?
Sri Lanka, they in 2016 World Economic Regional Forum organized this path to this catastrophe, which led to president fleeing the country and people being without food, and IMF organizing the loan to create macroeconomic stability. But it was I don't remember. It was such a jokish name for these policies, but it was something splendor or whatever. But it was, they greened Sri Lanka's agriculture and forbade pesticides and other modern agricultural means of effective production of crops so that Sri Lanka had to import the food from abroad, which depleted financial resources, and finally there was this default. But it was horrendous, and it was a purely World Economic Forum's it organized. There were Harvard University was involved. Nobel Prize winner Stiglitz was involved, and George Soros was also involved in this regional meeting 2016, which preceded these.
So George Soros, Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz, Harvard University, and the World Economic Forum were instrumental in creating the Sri Lankan disaster, which led to basically a famine and the overthrow of the Sri Lankan government. So you say that this was ultimately caused by the policy directed through the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, which is aimed to steer countries towards meeting the United Nations Sustainable Development, or SDG, goals. I mean, this is nightmarish, and it happened. This is what happens when these fantasies collide with people's lives.
And now the same thing is happening in macro level in the European Union, and I believe also in Canada.
Do you think the deindustrialization of Europe is intentional?
It's hard to know, but some the false policies, especially energy sanctions now in this conflict, they have contributed to it enormously. But
what about the opposition to? Could I ask you again about the opposition to nuclear power? Because you mentioned in our first chat that a remarkable series of events that you personally encountered when you were involved in Finnish nuclear policy.
Yes, it was the whole green movement and the Green Party formations. It began around anti-nuclear activities, and it was until they more or less killed the build-up of nuclear power in Western Hemisphere. It was in the very core of their policies what they were promoting, and we managed to keep up building nuclear power, and we have the world's biggest nuclear power plant. We have had enormous problems of building it up because the regulations are, because of fear of radiation, which is the public is irrationally afraid of radiation, and it is largely because of peace movement and the part of peace movement which really became part of green parties. And this is an irony, because the peace movement has now in Europe turned into bellicose rhetoric, and I'm just astonished how. But knowing the origins of this green ideology, I'm not that surprised.
It's amazing. Just to unpack that just a little bit, just so that people understand. I mean, the green movement and peace movement, apparently for peace, is now warmongering with regard to Russia, Ukraine. Then at the same time, the movement is, the Greens are against nuclear power, except that nuclear power is environmentally friendly and provides great sources of power, clean, if you will, power, yet they're against it. And as you said, it starts with that anti-nuclear push and then continues. So surely the argument can be made that whether they intended it or not, they're heading us for collapse because they're cutting off any source of real power for people, electrical power, that is, and then forcing us into things that really don't make any sense, windmills and solar power.
Yes, that is the case. Greenpeace was started by, it was a Canadian activists protesting against the nuclear test in Alaska. So that was the birth of Greenpeace, or I guess it was 1970 or so. But nevertheless, they have been instrumental of destroying energy infrastructure. And once they got nuclear power out, they began to harass fossil fuel industry with disastrous consequences. It was because, for example, in Europe was still producing more natural gas 15 years ago than Russia, but then they managed to stop all investments in Europe and managed to kill fracking in all Europe. So this is, and although I mean Putin he was very active in supporting these green movement to stop fracking, and they didn't succeed in the US until Joe Biden was chosen the president. But apparently the situation is so bad that even Biden administration has to reverse policies now.
So any final thoughts for us? I mean, where do we go from here? What can people do? Because this situation is horrendous. The reality of some kind of occult activity among our leadership, which leads them to policies that are, as you said, destroying us. It makes sense. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence, if not more than that. But do you see a way out of this mess that we're in right now?
I think, and the reason why I made the Postil article and I made public that I am in allegiance with the Christians who have been for decades noticing this development, and they have known that these theosophical ideas are there, and the real reason is that the Christians and sound people, they do not mix reality and religion, what the nature pantheists do. They mix their religion with reality, which is the most dangerous. And I don't see any other. In the last part of my essay in Postil about world economic being a dangerous religious cult, is that we really have to wake up, like Jordan Peterson has been instrumental in waking up people, and I think it's and he has realized, because the assault in New Zealand, in Poland, but in not Poland, but in Holland and in all European Union against agriculture is something. Especially there was this warning 2 weeks ago. There are these two guys. Happer is the other guys. They are atmosphere physicists. But now the net zero people and this Agenda 2030, what they demand is that you can no longer use natural gas to produce fertilizers, and fertilizers are produced by natural gas. There is practically no alternative. So, and they predict that 50% of world population will be without food if they succeed.
And they're going to affect, Africans and everything else. It always strikes me as so strange that the very ones that the left claims to want to support, let's support the poor, they're the ones they're killing off first.
Oh yes, and I've written several papers where I point out that in sub-Saharan Africa, well over 90% of total energy consumption is charcoal, and if the population growth continues, they will burn all their forests and all the flora and fauna will suffer. And the only way to boost development in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is to allow that they can use their vast coal reserves and to promote. I think they are waking up, because this arrogant West is just destroying now everything.
And it's strange too, because in order to wake up, particularly for countries under threat, like in sub-Saharan Africa, they have to recognize that they are being lied to, that they're being presented with falsehoods as if they were good for them, when they are in fact harmful for them. So you've got to wake up to a horrific reality, which is that the West, while offering you seemingly good things, is working to harm you, while at the same time saying that they're trying to work to benefit you.
Exactly.
The governments of Namibia and the Democratic Republic of Congo have recently rebuffed Western leaders. In Namibia, the German leader Olaf Scholz, and in the DRC, Emmanuel Macron. They've both been given short shrift by their former colonial possessions in precisely the manner you suggest, John Henry. The Africans have indeed woken up to the fact that their former masters will come over and dictate terms to them that are deleterious to the fortunes of their people, which explains their turn towards China for better investment terms, without conditions, as it were.
Well, God help us. I wanted to thank you, Professor Paunio, for making your findings known to the world, because I think your effort in waking up people will save lives. And God willing, they listen to. And I can't end off without begging you to see. You've seen the evil in the world. There is a God, a good God, who loves you too. And I'm sure after doing so much work to wake people up to the evil that's there, he wants to see you woken up to his reality as well.
Okay, we'll see.
Frank, any final thoughts?
Yes. On the note of whether or not we can do anything, it is not by any means a question of total despair. The example of the Dutch farmers shows that mobilization on the basis of human scale values can win, and they are on the verge of winning a victory in the Dutch regional elections right now that will present a challenge to the Dutch government, bring the World Economic Forum's plans to close 3,000 farms to an end, and also show that there is a human scale alternative to these top-down distant bureaucracies who wish to impose a de jure fantasy world upon you that will destroy your life. If you organize on community relations, on human scale, on the basis of the strength of your relationships with people in real life and the values that built the West, the Christian values that built the West, you can fight and you can win. And they are winning in the Netherlands, and they will soon be winning in Belgium too. That's a message for all of us.
Professor Mikko Paunio, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Frank, thank you as always.
Oh, thank you, John. And thank you, Professor, as well. What a pleasure to meet you.
And God bless all of you. And we'll see you next time. Hi, everyone. This is John Henry Weston. We hope you enjoyed this program. To see more like it, be sure to hit the subscribe button below to get all the latest content from LifeSiteNews. Check the links in the description to read more and connect with us on social media so that you can stay up to date with all the latest life, family, faith, and freedom news. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.